Alright, so this video is going to be a little bit out of order. I just have a bunch of footage on the camera that I haven't put up yet because I was really thrashing on this thing to get the head gaskets replaced and to the track. Long story short, ended up finding a head gasket leak, and thanks to Brooks from DIY Garage Texas, I go over that a little bit in depth in the video, the conversation that we had. So I'm just going to basically put this footage up and we'll just go through it. But that's why it's out of order. This is not a new issue. I'm not pulling it apart again. Just showing you what I did before I went to the track. I just didn't have time to edit it. All right, so we have a stock bottom end, 5.3, Gen 3 5.3 LS. Heads have never been off of it, and we're starting to go a little bit faster with it. So we went 9.0 the other day, 9.09, 9.1, 9.21, 3 different passes. And what I'm going to talk about today is coolant pressure. I'm trying to develop a baseline for my coolant pressure. So depending where you look, coolant pressure readings are all over the place, whether it's like acceptable or you have a problem. So my coolant pressure readings are in the problem range if you look at it. So I'm running like about 40, 45 psi coolant pressure, but a lot of that varies with the coolant level, the type of surge tank or overflow. So what I'm trying to do is develop a baseline, and this test I'm going to do today is going to help me understand if I have a combustion leak because of a head gasket issue, or if what I have is acceptable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a test. I already did the test. So I'm using this block tester, testing fluid, block tester. You basically stuff this thing into the radiator while it's running and up to temp, and there's a little bubble on the top, and you burp it, and then the fluid will change color if there's a combustion leak, or you have combustion gases in the coolant passage, meaning that there would be like cylinder pressure getting into the coolant passage. So I'll insert some pictures here. Mine showed up like a light green color. It says if it's yellow or greenish that there's combustion gases getting into the circuit, which could mean head gasket issue or leak. But because I'm pushing this thing and it's a stock bottom end engine and heads have never been off and stock head bolt, stock gasket, what I want to do is I want to verify it against 3 other vehicles. I'm going to do it against I have 3 other LS vehicles in the family. So I have a Silverado, which I replaced the engine on and I had the heads off of. So I'm going to compare it against another 5.3 that had the heads off. I'm going to compare it to a 6.0 that never had the heads off, and I'm going to compare it to another 6.0 that did have the heads off and is turbo, twin turbo. So I have a Ranger, an Escalade, and a Silverado, and I'm going to do 2 tests on each one to see what the differences are, because I want to find out the differences. I want to find out if it's a head gasket issue or if it's a stock gasket thing. So what would be an interesting finding is if the Escalade that never had the heads off of it finds the same type of reading as the ones that were boosting. Right, so we have the little guy here. It sucks air up. You got a bulb on the top of it, and it sucks air when you squeeze it. What we're going to do is we're going to suck air out of the expansion tank, basically the radiator. We're going to do this for a minute, and you don't want to suck any fluid into it. Okay, so end result of the Silverado that did have heads off but hasn't been boosted is still blue. Perfect, no issues. Alright, so unfortunately this engine did show that it had exhaust gas in the coolant system. So coolant pressure is a little bit higher than it normally should be. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rerun the test. It might take me a little bit longer. I was about to rip it apart and pull both heads off, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the test again with one bank disabled. So basically I'll get it up to operating temp, and then I'll just disconnect fuel and spark from this side, rerun the test, hook it back up, disconnect this side, and then rerun the test. That way I'll be able to see if it's getting exhaust gas from both banks or just from one bank, and I can narrow it down and I don't have to pull the other side off. So that would be really cool to see like one bank is bad, the other one's good, and then I can just rip that apart and look at that gasket. Kind of help me narrow it down a little bit and figure out where the issue might be, and I can spend more time looking at that instead of guessing on the whole thing. All right guys, track day tomorrow, so just making some small changes, making sure that I got some air in the tires, and my my door lock is there. Just minor stuff. Intake is off. I got the heads off, and then we have the motor completely apart. So just minor things happening before tomorrow. So we have some things to talk about. So last video, I think it was the last video, track video, car went 9.0, then it went 9.1, and then it went 9.21. I went 9.1 at 129, so it did 123 to the 8th, and then 9.1 at 129, so I was on the brakes because I was pushing coolant out. So I didn't really think a whole lot of it because I've seen that before. If you overfill the radiator, it like spits coolant out if the overflow isn't good enough. And I've also been logging coolant pressure. So my coolant pressure seemed a little bit higher than normal, but there's not a whole lot of data for stock bottom end coolant pressure because usually by the time people start logging coolant pressure, they're beyond stock bottom end stuff. So I had it in there. I kind of put it in there just on a whim because I had a hole for my old gauge. And I put the sensor in there and just hooked it up. So I had no idea what good or bad was, and it seemed kind of high, but the car was working. It was working really well. And I did put the new lower hose on, and then I filled the radiator like to the top, and I usually never do that, so that's what I kind of attributed my water loss to. Like I said, it ran really well, and then fixed the whole pulley thing, and lower water, didn't spit water, but my coolant pressure was still kind of high. So overall, after that whole track day, I was really pumped. I was like really excited about it. I felt pretty good about the car, like everything was working really well. And then I had someone who I know and trust message me and say, hey dude, I just watched your video and something's wrong with the car. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? So that was my first response. And this is Brooks from DIY Garage Texas channel. So I'll put a little link description here. And a lot of you guys know that I talked to him. I mentioned him quite a bit. So he's the one that talked me into like getting the diaper on the car and stuff like that. Like he's always keeping me in check about safety stuff because he's going fast and wants to make sure that I'm safe. So I really appreciate that. But he sends me this message. He's like, dude, your car's messed up. Something's wrong. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like I couldn't hear anything. And he's like, I was listening to the video and third gear, something happened, and the noise that you're like I forget how he phrased it. Something happened in third gear. Listen to how the car sounds in third gear, and that noise scares me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I listened to the video. I literally listened to it like probably 20 times, and then I started to hear like a slight change in some noise. So he's a really good ear apparently for this stuff, and a lot better than mine. So I watched it, and then I finally realized there was a change in some noise, and you could even see it on the data log that there was some stuff happening, like boost change, voltage change. There was something that happened. There was a noise change that happened. Like I said, he's never steered me in a wrong direction before, so I think we actually spent like 3 days talking about this. This is the third day that we've been talking about this. So he told me that right away. Said there was a problem, thought it was a head gasket. Specifically, he mentioned that he thought it was head gasket. And that's where I got this block tester thing. The block tester that tests for combustion gases in the coolant. So he mentioned that, sent me an Amazon link, and he's like, try that thing, I guarantee you're gonna have a leak. So still skeptical, it was like 30 bucks or whatever on Amazon, so I tested it, and it was a leak. I didn't believe it. Head gasket, I'm like, who the hell blows a head gasket on an LS? Like, it never really happens. So what I did to verify, I did 2 tests on this, I did 2 tests on my Silverado, I did 2 tests on the Escalade that has a 6 liter in it, and I did 2 tests on my Ranger that's twin turbo, 6 liter. And all three of the other vehicles came back negative, like no combustion gas. This one came back bad. I'm like, what in the fucking hell? Because the car runs great, everything's fine. It spit water, but then it went, 9.2 after that. I didn't really think like anything was a big deal. I didn't think there was a problem. It was a little weird that the coolant pressure was high, but it wasn't like that high compared to what other people are seeing with stock bottom end stuff. So there was a post on the Sloppy Private page about coolant pressure, and there's a lot of guys talking about what they're seeing with stock bottom end stuff. And there's guys seeing like upwards of 30 psi for pressure, and I was seeing like 40, so not really that much higher, I guess, out of the range, where I thought it was like a catastrophic issue or really needed to be addressed at that point. But I also don't like to go off of speculation and feelings, especially when you're talking about safety stuff, because you're talking about possibly blowing a head gasket and like blowing a radiator hose off and getting water under the tires. So I'd rather take the extra safety measures before something like that happened. So because the test came back bad, I decided I was going to pull the heads and check the heads. I know I overheated the car and it was really hot, 294 it was, 293 on the log, and that's pretty hot. Anyway you slice it, it was pretty hot. So I thought maybe I warped the head or whatever. So I'm like, I'll pull it apart. We got track day tomorrow. It's like 7 p.m. right now. I came home from work, pulled the whole thing apart. I have a spare 5.3 right there. I have gaskets. I know I have bolts. I know I have spare heads. Even if there's like the heads are warped, I have a whole nother engine I could put in or put new heads on or whatever I needed to do. Just try to get it right for tomorrow. So I pull the head off. I loosen everything up. I pull the head off. And if you're familiar with pulling an LS head, usually you pull it off and it like kind of sticks, and then the MLS gasket kind of like get stuck, like one stuck to the block, part stuck to the head, some stuck in the dowel, and you kind of like fight with it, shimmy it to get it off. This just like popped off straight clean. I'm like, what the fuck was that? That was really weird. I've never experienced that before. So popped the thing off and found out that it has paper gaskets on it. So if you guys remember Matt Happel, Sloppy Mechanics 8s for 8 build, the first motor that he had in the 8s for 8 build had a head gasket like this, and it blew it out when it was on the dyno. Like, first day he was on the dyno, blew the head gasket out of it. Cylinder 8 chucked the whole chunk out of it. So I was assuming that this had MLS gaskets, like the majority of these do. Getting this motor, I had no idea what year it was or anything like that. I have no idea what the history is or remember anything about it. But apparently it has paper gaskets on it. So these are some of the head bolts from the driver's side, and you can see that they're all burnt. Because it's leaking by, combustion gas is leaking by and burning the bolts. So that's what was happening on the driver's side. All the cylinders look really good. Everything is fine. There's nothing else really damaged. The heads are good. The block is good. I just pulled the head off of this side. Gonna pull the gasket off, and the whole gasket is good, but it's just leaking. It's all kind of coming together now. So I was wondering how, even on 10 psi, I was having high coolant pressure. 22 psi had high coolant pressure. It wasn't that much higher than 10 psi. So I'm like thinking, it doesn't seem like there's a catastrophic failure or like something really wrong, but something's not right. That's what it is, basically. So that's what I'm doing right now. I have other gaskets. I'm gonna put new gaskets. I'm gonna copper spray, put MLS gaskets in, put head bolts in, slam it back together, and go to the track tomorrow and run an 8. But yeah, interesting find. Thanks to Brooks for kind of like talking to me about what this issue might be, and at least bringing it up. And he even said to me during the conversation, he's like, dude, I don't care what you say. He's like, I'm just trying to prevent an accident. So I really appreciate that. If you see something, say something. And he heard something that he didn't like, and he was like, I don't care if you're pissed off at me, but something's wrong with that. And we actually found something. So technically it isn't like a problem or anything was wrong, nothing was blown, nothing was bad, but doing what we're doing right now, it was not an ideal situation and we can easily make it better. So I'm happy with pulling it apart, putting new gaskets on it, slamming it back together instead of trying to gain a 1/10 with the risk of like blowing that gasket out. So another funny story I'll also add, if you guys are familiar with the channel, you've been watching for a while, when the transmission went bad on the Ranger, Brooks, who identified this issue in a video by listening to it, he was also the same person that told me my transmission in the truck was going bad, like 2 months before it actually failed. So I made a video, made a couple passes, track day video, normal thing, went over the data logs, everything. And he messaged me, he's like, something's wrong with your transmission. I think it's okay, I think it's fine. He's like, no, something's wrong with it. And it was like 1 or 2 track days later, it failed at the track. Went right to rev limiter, all gears, done. He's a very experienced person, knows a lot more than I do, so I think it's pretty cool when you can like see things and hear things and you're just like, yep, something's messed up. So yeah, make sure to check out his channel, DIY Garage TX. A lot of you guys probably know it already, but check him out.